Hey there, Colts fans. This is Nathan Brown, Colts Insider for the Indianapolis Star, here for another edition of the Colts Cover-2 Podcast, coming off the Colts bye week that followed their 31-25 overtime win against the Atlanta Falcons in Berlin. Got a big game against the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium coming up here on Sunday. We've got some injury updates and some other things to talk about here in this edition of the pod. Joining me, of course, is my co-host, fellow Colts insider for the Indy Star, Joel A. Erickson. Got a lot to break down and some interesting things that we learned coming from the Colts complex today about where the Colts stand on the health and injury status. Maybe that's a good place to kick off this podcast and update things after a week or so away. What did you feel like was the most important thing that we learned on the injury front? Probably a no-brainer there, I imagine.
Well, I think the thing that most people care about is Charvarius Ward, Mooney Ward, and I've been trying to telegraph this kind of all week. Maybe even before that. I think when we did injury reports, going into Berlin, I tried to. The key tell was that we saw him on the field practicing, not practicing because he couldn't do that, practicing with the team, but like he was on the field at practice with a trainer working. That's usually a sign that a guy is close. I don't know. It doesn't really say anything about like how his concussion went because he was still in the protocol. We haven't had a chance to talk to him yet. I think when we do, that'll be interesting. But just once they get those guys back out there, that's generally, one of the things that is a tell. And I think the thing that's most interesting about it is Sauce Gardner's here now. And so now the idea is not only are you getting Ward back to shore up cornerback, you're getting him back to pair him with a guy who's probably better than the guy who's been the Colts' best corner this season. So I'm very curious about how it changes the defense. I have some thoughts that we can get into about how it might change the defense. I know some things. Number one, and this isn't from me, this is from Chris Hewitt, the secondary coach, the pass game coordinator. They want to play more man, and they feel like with Ward and Gardner they can do that.
Yeah, it's when you think about it. This predates me coming onto the beat, but the secondary that Mooney left when he got injured ahead of that Week 6 game against the Cardinals to now. You're talking about what he was starting along with Jonathan Edwards, Cam Mitchell, Mekhi Blackman, and now you're going to have Ward with Sauce Gardner. Like Jalen Jones wasn't even back yet at that point. He was still injured and has obviously come back since then, but won't be the starting guy on the corner as evidenced by the fact that he only got, I think, 3 defensive snaps when Mooney wasn't even active last week against the Falcons. Very different cornerback group and a lot more potent. There's only, I think I mentioned this on a couple podcasts before, the Colts would now be one of maybe just 2 teams that have 2 former All-Pro guys on their corners. It's a lot for an offense to handle when you've got and it's perfect timing going up against a team like Kansas City and their offense.
Yeah, The thing is, I think some people are just like play press man no matter what, no matter who's out there, and it'll go well for you. But that's just not the way it works. If you play press man with corners like Jonathan Edwards, he's an undrafted rookie. Like he's a they like him as a developmental piece, but he's developmental. He's not a guy who's ready to go right now. Mekhi Blackman, I think we've seen, is not ready to play man on a specific level. Like, you could play press. You can call press man with any players on the field, but the results you're going to get are going to be wildly different. And so, if your goal is to keep teams off the scoreboard, that's the goal, you gotta make calls that aren't going to put you in a bad spot. And so the thing is, now they can play press man on both sides of the outside, and I think it's interesting. Here's what I really want to know is, with DeForest Buckner out, with your best pass rusher not available anymore, and you have these 2 You have these two man-to-man corners. You have Cam Bynum behind them. You have Kenny Moore. Do you blitz more? Because the whole thing about blitzing is that in blitzing, you're going to have to leave people on an island, and they're going to have then you have to be able to hold up in coverage. Well, if you want to play more man on the outsides and you feel like you've got two guys who can shut down opposing receivers, is that what you do? Do you try to make up for Buckner's absence by blitzing more often? Lou Anarumo has done that in the past. His first 3 years in Cincinnati, he was an over 30% blitz guy. He has not been that in Indianapolis so far. It's been more simulated pressures, which, okay, so for people who don't, speak football, a simulated pressure is essentially a zone blitz. So they drop somebody out who you expect to rush, and they bring somebody you don't expect to rush. Is what a simulated pressure or zone blitz is. He's done more of that than he has actual blitzing. But I wonder if a lot of that has to do with the corners he's had. And if you give him Gardner and Ward on the outside, and he feels like they can hold up, which he will. Like, if he feels like if he's in a spot where he feels like he doesn't have to protect his corners, does his blitz rate go up? So far this season, as a defense, they're 19th in the NFL. They're blitzing on 25.7% of the snaps. That is more than like obviously Gus Bradley's defense. Gus Bradley never blitzed. And that's a little bit of hyperbole, but also they were 29th in the league at 19.2% last year, so they really didn't blitz very much at all. I wonder if maybe you see in this last 7 games that, especially if Buckner has to miss extended time, if that's the way they make up for it, is by leaning on those corners and then bringing extra rushers.
I mean, that would seem like a thing that would make sense, especially in this matchup, because I think you probably have to be a little aggressive. Lou has talked about not wanting to be that bend, don't break type of defense. And I think when you're going up against a team like in an offense like Kansas City, I just think that becomes that much more difficult. I don't think you can hope to live on them having 12, 14, 15 play drives and hope to just happen to hold them to a field goal, because Patrick Mahomes is just such a great dynamic playmaker that he's just going to find something at some point if you give him enough opportunities and you allow him to stay on field. So that when you keep in mind the fact that with Buckner there, they would probably be double teaming him as we have seen so often this year when he's been on the field the first 9 games. Not really having to double team anyone. I just think you probably have to bring some level of a blitz, and obviously you're not going to do that every single play, but I think you have to. That's probably a key to be able to try and get them out of sorts, either get to Mahomes or force him into having to throw the ball away, or just to dump it off and not be able to strike so much downfield. And I think when you've got guys like Ward and Sauce on the outside, I mean, that's what you get those types of guys for, to put that level of faith and kind of just put them on an island and rely on them being able to make plays. This seems like the type of team that, if that's going to work, I think this is probably a team that you would want to try that against, because I think that's probably a big part of how you can go and try and attack this Kansas City team and be a little bit on the offensive instead of just hoping that you can find a way to stop them and turn the ball over at some point.
I'm also curious to see what the matchups look like with Ward, because I asked Chris Hewitt this, we asked Lou Anarumo this weekend, like, when you have two corners like this, does you just play sides and they just take whoever shows up, essentially? And I thought it was interesting that both coaches were kind of like, no. The interesting thing is that now we as we learn these guys, we can do a little bit more with it. Mm-hmm. And that is interesting to to me. Like, how do they decide? I don't know if this is how it'll shake out or not, but I know Chris Hewitt said that they feel like for a tall guy, Gardner can play smaller, faster receivers well. He's also younger. I wonder if maybe that means he's more in that vein. But like this Chiefs game is a really great, question for what they're going to do, because since they have Rashee Rice back, he's the number one guy. He generally profiles the way they use him as a drag middle type of player, not necessarily the deep threat the same way. Like, do you put Ward on him and then you put Gardner on Tyquan Thornton or Hollywood Brown or whichever speedster is on the field? Mm-hmm. Do you continue to use Mekhi Blackman in that way? And then the other thing, and I think this is the most interesting part of this game, is what's his plan against Travis Kelce? Because Travis Kelce is 36 and he feels like he's gotten a lot older in the last couple of years. But if you look at it, he's the only AFC tight end who's having a better receiving season than Tyler Warren at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you're bringing a lot of pressure and you're forcing Mahomes to get rid of the ball quickly. If Kelce is open in the flat, or just kind of on lots of crossers across the middle, I mean, if that's available to them, he's going to take that every time. And then you're going to end up with a lot of those, 10, 12, 15 play drives, which is exactly what you don't want to have happen, I think, against this Chiefs team. So that's something that will be interesting to watch. You have mentioned it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that could be a type of matchup that Jalen Jones makes a lot of sense for. I was really intrigued, and I don't know that I caught it in the moment, but the fact that he only played, I think, 3 snaps on defense, and the choice was Mekhi Blackman over him against the Falcons in Berlin. Yes, I know that we got Sauce Gardner. That was his first game, but I think the idea or the expectation, at least it was from my standpoint, was that you would have Sauce and Jalen until you got Ward back. So what did you make of the Colts and Lou leaning so heavily on Mekhi Blackman in that game in Berlin and going him over Jalen for the bulk of that game?
Some of it, I think, is just that the Falcons' number 2 receiver is Darnell Mooney, and the Falcons see him as like a speed deep threat. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing, and no one said this to me, and this is just me like kind of paying attention over the course of the year. Anarumo, for some reason, doesn't seem to really trust Jalen Jones. I don't get it. I don't know if it's just an injury thing. I don't know if he doesn't feel like he has enough time on task with him. It didn't really make sense this week against the Falcons because he played really well against the Steelers.
Yeah. He
was by far their best corner against the Steelers. And it just feels like there's a barrier there that they have to get over with him. I was surprised he only played 3 snaps. I just think he had a pass breakup in those 3 snaps. Like he's a guy that I think maybe doesn't fit maybe the speed profile that Anarumo wants in that corner spot, but I've said this before with Jalen Jones. He's just a battler. He's a gamer. He's a guy who finds a way to get the job done. And for whatever reason, it just seems like Lou Anarumo doesn't see that yet in a way to use him. So I also think that maybe this might, if they don't put him on Travis Kelce, this might be another very low snap game for him because, like I just mentioned, the Chiefs receiving core is essentially Rashee Rice and a bunch of burners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. A tough to go from being back and having a great game against the Steelers and then only playing 3 snaps and then having a bye week. And then if, being relied upon heavily, but if they see this as a pivotal matchup for him and one where they feel like he is the best guy for it, then I think you've got to call upon him. And that's what guys are paid to do. So we've hit on Javarius Ward here coming back. He was in practice. I think there was maybe moments to start practice off that at least the portion that we saw today where he was doing some work off to the side. And he was also in some, positional group drills that we saw as well before we left practice. Worth mentioning that he still technically is in concussion protocol. So I think you mentioned this earlier, we have not been able to talk to him yet. He would have to clear protocol. We don't have a sense of how far he is through that. I imagine the fact that he was in some actual team drills today might indicate that he was in that last step at this point. So maybe there's a chance that they clear him, tomorrow, or announce that he's been cleared, and maybe we get to talk to him tomorrow. That would obviously be ideal, just to get a sense of, where he is at, exactly how precautious the Colts were in holding him out for these 4 weeks, or these 4 games, I guess. So some other injury news that we learned: Samson Ebukam was back at practice today. Tyquan Lewis was not. Anthony Gold was back at practice. And then someone that I know a lot of folks have been asking about, Jalen Carlies, linebacker, who has missed the entirety of this season so far, back at practice, although Shane Steichen indicated that, maybe his ramp up could take a little bit longer. Not maybe quite as certain that he could be ready to play as soon as this weekend, but always real big to have a guy that you think could be an impact player back for a pretty important stretch here for the Colts playoff positioning here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, Carlies, I'm really interested to see what they do here. I don't want to be the wet blanket for everybody who's excited about Jalen Carlies. But if you think about what's happened with the way his career has gone, it's a little bit. There's a little bit of Juju Brents to it, where he's been hurt a lot. And then the other thing is, if you look at this specific defensive coaching staff, it's a lot like Jalen Jones. He missed most of the offseason with shoulder surgery, came back for a little while in training camp. He was not the starter in training camp, like the definitive starter. He was rotating in when he played. And then he suffers a pretty severe ankle injury and goes through surgery, misses the first 10 weeks of the season. I'm not sure I expect Anarumo to trust him right away. And I don't know what that means, because there's only 7 games left. I don't know if he's going to get chances to do it. I do think that they should look at him pretty hard, because they have not been great from the standpoint of linebacker coverage this year. And, he's a former college safety. If he's healthy, if he hasn't had, significant setbacks from all of the foot injuries that he's dealt with and ankle injuries he's dealt with, in theory, because he's a college safety, he's suited to that. But I just don't know if Anarumo is going to do it. He's also a guy who's known for valuing experience over everything else. I don't know. I don't know what to expect from it. Just for reference on the linebackers, Jermaine Pratt, who's the starter on the weak side, according to NFL's Next Gen Stats, is giving up 122.2 rating when he's the nearest defender in coverage. Zaire Franklin is giving up a 98.7 rating when he's the nearest defender in coverage. They need somebody to play in those roles. I just don't know if they're going to give Jalen Carlies a shot.
Yeah, he along with Ward, they were opened their 21-day practice window, where the team now has the opportunity to activate them, put them on the the 53-man roster. So if you do that in that 21-day window, with someone like Carlies that, as you mentioned, has some question marks, then you're having to take someone off of that list. So that's the sacrifice that you're making now. If there's someone really truly at the very bottom there, maybe you take a chance, and because you think that this guy could have the potential to have some, big impact. But if you're kind of settled and battle tested with the group you've got, I think you make a great point there that, maybe Lou and this coaching staff just would rather go with the group that they've had and the group that they've seen, the group that have operated with each other all season, rather than rolling the dice and kind of unsettling things there. So we'll have to monitor that over the next couple weeks, and see where that ultimately lands. Also great to, as I mentioned earlier, to see Samson Ebukam back at practice. A potentially key piece there on that defensive line, that is, we have, we mentioned right around that Berlin game, a group that will be without DeForest Buckner now for until mid-December at the earliest. And the fact that he was going to Panama to get some stem cell treatment there. I mean, great that he's doing something like that wouldn't necessarily prohibit him from being able to come back at all this season. But we still don't have a great sense of exactly how extreme this injury is, really even what it is, to be totally honest. And there's a lot of uncertainty, I still feel like, on whether the Colts will see him. We've asked Shane a couple times whether he expects him to be back, and it's always been we're very hopeful that we will get him back, but it's never been anything completely definitive. And so that kind of leaves us still wondering a little bit what that defensive line is going to look like, not only in 4 weeks or so, but once we get to the end of the season and the postseason as well.
Yeah. Buckner, I think, is a huge loss. I think I said that before. I do think, and I'm going to write something about this week, and none of these guys, no one is going to be Buckner. You're not going to have a backup who's like Buckner unless you have a draft pick you stash. But I do think it's interesting, though, to point out that maybe without a lot of fanfare, Chris Ballard is actually getting a lot out of his backup defensive tackles this year. So he signed Neville Gallimore for not very much. And said, I think he can be better than he's been in the NFL. Well, 10 games in, he has 2.5 sacks. That's a sack more than he's ever had in a single NFL season. He's playing pretty well. And then the other one is that, they tell me about Adebawore, a guy who really only played like 130-ish snaps his first 2 years in the league. Now, this season, he's played a very significant role. He's already at 243 snaps. He has a sack and a half. His pressure rate's good. His quarterback hits have been good. Like he's just taken a step forward as a player. And it turned out that they've actually gotten pretty good play from their backup defensive tackles. Now, are either of those guys Buckner? No. They're not going to give you the same thing as Buckner. But I do think, at least from a tackle perspective, they're better equipped now than they have been. Like when Taven Bryan or Raekwon Davis was playing those spots to fill in. Like you think about a couple years ago when Buckner got hurt against Green Bay, and all of a sudden you're playing Taven Bryan, you're playing Raekwon Davis. Those guys are getting tons of snaps and they look terrible. Yeah, at least on the inside of the defense, it feels like they can reasonably expect a little bit more with the way Gallimore and Adebawore have played.
From what you know about some of these guys, giving them a bigger role, what we saw coming out of Atlanta, this is, as you mentioned earlier, this is not an injury or an absence that just can be completely replaced. Can this team, this defensive line, this defensive front seven, still get by for the next couple weeks without him? Or how would you maybe best describe how you feel like his absence is going to affect this team moving forward at minimum over these next 3 games?
Yeah, I just think that it hurts the overall pass rush. You're going to get some flash plays from Gallimore. You're going to get some flash plays really from Adebawore. His sacks are at 1.5, but his pressure numbers have been really good. But you're just not going to get the consistent presence inside. You're not going to get as many quick wins unless Laiatu Latu suddenly takes a huge step forward and he looks like the Pittsburgh version more often than he looks like the Atlanta version. So it's a spot where, like I said, like I kind of hinted at this earlier, I think they're going to have to blitz more. And I know Anarumo probably doesn't want to do that against Patrick Mahomes, but it feels like they're going to have to blitz more because I just don't know that I trust Latu to suddenly turn into a premier edge rusher, the kind that can kind of carry a pass rush. Whereas like Buckner is a guy who carries a pass rush consistently. And I just don't know. I'll be curious to see if Latu can be more consistent with the way he's played.
I'm not remembering them all immediately off the top of my head, but I know, some of, if not all of the sacks that the Colts connected on against that Atlanta Falcons team a couple weeks
all
ago.
Blitzes.
We're all blitzes. Cam Bynum had one. Zaire Franklin had one. There's another one that I think I'm forgetting here. there you go. So none from your defensive line. That maybe kind of shows you or hints at a little bit what was successful against Atlanta. Again, a little bit different animal going up against Michael Penix Jr. versus Patrick Mahomes. But maybe that's a little bit foreshadowing for how the Colts could go about things. I think one of the other interesting aspects of this game is, staying on the defensive side of the ball. Just this success that Lou Anarumo, Colts defensive coordinator in his first year here, has had, or maybe not as much so, had over the course of his entire tenure in Cincinnati, but there was a 2-year stretch there where the Bengals made the playoffs both years. I don't believe they made the playoffs since then. It included that year where the Bengals went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Rams by a field goal. And then the following season in 2022-23, when they went to the AFC Championship game and ultimately, I think, lost by a field goal to the Chiefs. There was a stretch there where the Bengals won 3 straight games against Kansas City. Lou gets this reputation as being, I think it was maybe Von Bell on that defense named him the mad scientist for the way in which he'd been able to have success against Kansas City at a time where Kansas City against so many teams really kind of felt unbeatable, especially in those big postseason type moments. I think they won both a regular season game and a playoff game against them in 21, and then a regular season game as well against them in 22. Knowing a little bit about what we've seen from Lou and his schemes and his way he has attacked teams so far this year, that blitz thing obviously stands out a lot. But what do you make of just Lou Anarumo coached defense in general going up against what we've seen in Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and company?
Well, I know that the Chiefs themselves really the Chiefs themselves really respect Anarumo. If you go back to when Anarumo was hired earlier this year, obviously Kelce has that New Heights podcast with his brother, and there was a quote that I wrote that I ripped and wrote about, and a lot of people ripped and wrote about, was that Kelce saying, I can't believe Travis Kelce saying, I don't know why you would get rid of that guy. He's so good. And that's coming from the Chiefs. That's him saying, like, I'm basing this off of my personal experience. So yeah. I think the biggest thing is just Anarumo is good at, making it hard for teams to figure out what they're doing. And it's hard for them to make a prediction on what they're going to do because he's truly a game plan defensive coordinator. Like, there's a lot of coordinators who say, yeah, we adjust our plan to the opponent. Anarumo really does it. And I think that's why, Kelce and Reid and Mahomes have so much respect for him, is that it's hard to read the page on him. It's funny. This is an aside, but I saw, like, there's a big controversy now where Chris Jones in Kansas City said that Bo Nix knew what the Chiefs were going to do on a key third down. And I think a lot of fans hear that and they think that they got their signal somehow. He's just making a read. That's all that is. It's just a read based on what they've done before and what they've shown up on. It's what Daniel Jones is really good at. So, like, in the way defensive football is played, you don't necessarily call plays the way you think of calling plays on offense. You call coverages and you call, like, fronts and pressure packages and stuff like that. And there are blitzes involved. But you're looking more for concepts. And teams look for tells to figure out, okay, when this safety does this, that means this defense is in this coverage. Or when this linebacker moves into this gap, that means he's probably going to blitz. That's all Nix was doing. That's what the Colts do. And I think the thing that Anarumo does to kind of bring this full circle is he just makes it really hard for the quarterback to do that.
Yeah. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think what I remember from maybe it was even just the first of those Chiefs wins that Lou did that really stood out was, there was this idea that the way to get to Patrick Mahomes and stop them was just to blitz him like crazy. And teams just couldn't. He was at a point in his career where he was just getting out of everything, and he was rushing, or he was making these crazy throws on the run, which he's still making a good amount of. Maybe it feels a little bit more routine than it did back then. Maybe he's not making quite as many of them, or maybe it's just something about the fact that this team's 5-5 and they're not, 9-1 or 10-0 or whatever. But I believe I remember that Bengals team then kind of like all of a sudden just dropped everyone into coverage, and kind of really just tried to keep Patrick Mahomes in the pocket, and was essentially relying on trying to get guys home just in a normal situation, but also relying on the fact that their secondary could blanket those receivers and tight ends and skill players enough that Mahomes just didn't have anywhere to throw it. And so they were relying on not necessarily the quick wins that folks were hoping to get, and not really having a whole lot of success with. Now I know that, that's not something that you can really go back to once you've done it once, because a team like Andy Reid or Patrick Mahomes can look at that and just find a way to battle that and counteract that. But that was one thing that was interesting, that he kind of rolled the dice and completely went against the grain and did something that no one else was doing. And makes sense when you think about it and when you watch it happen on tape, but kind of went against the grain. And that's probably a good example of what you said there about Lou, someone who's willing to try things, willing to be aggressive, willing to look at his guys and figure out where his strength in his defense is against the matchup, and not just putting a fairly, normal, predictable play, group of play calls out on the field every single weekend.
Yeah, I think the other thing is and this is why I think Kelsey is such an interesting piece of this. Anarumo tries to build his game plans around taking the other team's best player out of the game. Mm-hmm. Don't know that it necessarily worked in Berlin with Drake London. Maybe they put more attention on Bijan in that game, and that's part of it. But that's what he's supposed to do, and I'm just curious how he sees this Chiefs offense, because, like I said, there's been a lot of talk about Kelsey's not the same player, and I don't think he is. But then last week against Denver, he's catching most of the passes. He's still the driving force in the receiving game. I'll be curious to see how Lou sees their offense and attacks it.
Yeah, I mean, when I talked to Jermaine Pratt, who was a member of that those Bengals defenses from 21 and 22 that Lou Anarumo coordinated, one thing that stood out to me today from talking to him was that he felt like one of the big important things that he took away from those groups and how Lou coached them was just trying to make teams one-dimensional. That's kind of what you're talking about there. I don't know, when I look at this Chiefs offense, that they have a really obvious, top number one playmaker that you want to take out. Is it Kelsey? Is it Rashee Rice? I don't, it's not like this team has Tyreek Hill. There's not like a super obvious, this is the guy, this is the, one of the 5 best receivers in the league type of guys, or
they don't even have 5 years ago Kelsey. They've got a diminished version, an end of career version of Kelsey.
That's what I think makes this different. And the interesting thing there too is that if you choose Kelsey to be that guy that you try to take out of the game, I don't know, Jalen Jones again, I think is a good matchup for that, but I don't know that that's like a lockdown. Travis Kelce's not going to catch a ball option. So then I don't know, how they would go about trying to attack Kelsey to take him out of things. That'll, I guess, just be something that we will have to look for a little bit coming up here on Sunday. Again, that is, I think, a 1 p.m. Eastern game at Arrowhead Stadium on CBS. We get Jim Nantz, Tony Romo on call for you folks watching at home. Transition to the Colts offense here and some of those matchups as we come in. The big topic for the last couple of weeks now, coming out of the Steelers game and even coming out of the Falcons game, despite the win, is just what has been different about the pass protection, both the offensive line, some of the skill guys picking up, pass blocking responsibilities, and of course Daniel Jones being able to take care of the ball, both with the sacks, the fumbles, and the interceptions that he has been prone to over the last couple weeks. Again, despite an overtime win in Berlin against the Falcons, I don't feel like we have, at least in interviews, come away and gotten a great answer as to what has gone wrong. Shaden Steichen, we've asked him several times, a bunch of different ways, and he keeps going back to feeling like or at least telling us that every single play is different. There's not a through line to all of the ways in which things have gone wrong. And he's also put a lot of this on himself and his shoulders, about play calls and protections, and schemes, either that has called in game or things that he's prepared that group to do leading into the game. Of course, has not really been specific against any of it. Daniel Jones said earlier today that it's, a lot on him to just hold on to the ball, protect the ball. You've got a great stat from Next Gen Stats that he hasn't necessarily been holding onto the ball really any longer the last couple of games compared to his season average. So it's hard to really put a finger on what has been different here. Yes, I mean, these, the Steelers defense and the Falcons defense has a lot of strength to it. It's not like they've been, getting blown up against some bottom defenses in the league. But I don't know that you would have, having seen what we saw the first 8 weeks of the season, I don't know that you would have necessarily expected to see it quite at the volume that we saw. Again, like 6 sacks in the first 7 weeks of the year, and then giving up 3 sacks against Tennessee, 5 against Pittsburgh, and 7 against Atlanta. Just very different, even though this offense still has been putting up points. They still put up 20 points against Pittsburgh, despite having 6 turnovers and 5 sacks, and put up 31 in overtime against Atlanta, despite having 7 sacks and a couple turnovers. So it's not like this team can't put up points on the board. They're still finding ways to. They're still getting the ball with opportunities, but they're losing some of those opportunities or making it a lot more difficult on themselves in the ways in which this this pass protection has just kind of been a little leaky lately.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff, but it's kind of like the whole thing. A lot of the good developments that we'd seen for most of the season have kind of gone awry. Like an example of that is Chris Ballard did an interview with Mike Tice. I think he's an old friend. Ballard doesn't usually talk, but Tice, him and Tice, I think, go way back. And he did something on Mike Tice's show and mentioned, there were a couple of plays that Jonathan Taylor had against Atlanta, where he didn't get good pass protection, and didn't pick up the blitz, which he's been doing a really good job of this year, better than he really ever has in his career. Ballard was saying he feels like he's taking a big step forward there. So there's been that. Pittsburgh felt like it was tackle driven, but specifically left tackle driven. Felt like Ryman really struggled against Alex Highsmith, and it kind of led to all of it. The Falcons blitzed more. The Falcons are almost more concerning to me, just because that's a heavy blitz team coming in. They're a heavy blitz team coming in. The Colts had previously been great at identifying the blitz and knowing where to go with it, and then they struggled against the Falcons. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about it going forward. One other thing here that I think is important to note, Shane Steichen's default position when you ask about something going wrong is to say it's his fault.
Sure.
That's his way of saying, I think that's his deflection to try to keep pressure off of his players. It's really hard to tell if that's the problem here because we don't have many details on it in terms of, was it a game plan thing? Tony Sprono Jr. is the one responsible for a lot of the blitz game planning, and obviously everything falls under Steichen. But his way of saying it, I think the way he sees the world is, if something goes bad with the team, ultimately I'm responsible for it, so I should take responsibility for it. I'm not convinced that it's always a good indicator of what's actually going wrong. And so I'm curious to see if they fix it over the bye week. The other thing, I think I said this, I did a radio appearance earlier today, and I think one of the other things that sticks out to me about, what Steichen is saying is he's kind of downplayed the idea that the sacks were an issue to us all week. I don't actually think that's how he feels about it. I think it's a deflection. And I think that the fact that they went into the self scout last week in the bye and really got a chance to like really take a look at themselves and see what was working. I would bet that a lot of that had to do with protection. I don't actually think he's writing it off as just an aberration. But like I said, his tendency publicly is to put it all on himself.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a successful coach in the league that would be, go from giving up 6 sacks in 7 games to then averaging 6 sacks a game over the last 2 and feel like that is a way that you can get by. I mean, it's not something that, it'd be interesting to see how often in the playoffs a team gives up 6 sacks and still wins. I bet that record is probably not very good. So that's not a trend. Like, I just don't think that's a trend coming into like December and January that you can feel like it's somewhere where you can rely on, again, maybe there are some teams that you face that are, really tough or really less than stellar against the run, and you can rely heavy on Jonathan Taylor. But again, that's just not, we've talked about it several times. That's not really the way this offense works. Primarily it's getting the passing game going first and then finding a way to get Jonathan going. And then if this team can get the lead, say by 10 points or 2 touchdowns, then that's where you can really work Jonathan in, and he can kind of wear teams down as he has often done this year. But I don't think this is a group that can just not have any, semblance of a successful passing game and be able to survive. I mean, they've got one of, if not the highest, passing offenses in terms of yards per game in the league this year. That's not something that they can just get away from as these opponents are continue to get tougher, to continue to get tougher. Kansas City is no slouch, and you've got groups like Houston on the schedule twice, Seattle. Like, things are not going to get easier from the groups that this offense is going to face here down the stretch, as you are in a really tight race between 2 other teams to try and clinch this bye with the number 1 seed here in the AFC, which is so crucial. I think potentially not having to play a first round game where you could very possibly see a team like Kansas City, again, not the exact opposite of the type of team that you would want to be facing in the first round of the playoffs and risk getting upset after such a great successful year. So
personally speaking, I don't know if I want a bye in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, I do want one, but what I'm referencing is I've gotten sick on the bye week 2 years in a row now. And if they get a bye in the playoffs, does that mean that I will get sick? Is it tied to the bye week? That's my question. I think the other thing with the passing game is we know that Jonathan Taylor can't carry the offense alone because of 2021. But I do think the way he's running is going to keep things open for the passing game the rest of the season, because you can't just go into a game going, we're just going to play it straight and try to handle both of them. You just can't. Like, I don't, especially after what he did to the Falcons, like, you have to be thinking we can't let Taylor go off like that. And so that's going to leave opportunities for the passing game. And really, they've taken advantage of them all year. It's just a question of, can they minimize the big errors that they've had, the big mistakes they've had the last 2 weeks? Because I think there's going to be, opportunities available for them, just with teams going. I bet there are teams that know that that the Colts prefer to throw to score and run to win. They prefer to throw early and then run late. But here's the thing. If you're a defensive coordinator and Jonathan Taylor's on the other side, he looks like this. Even if you know that, it'd be really hard for me to go, you know what, we're just going to play back and get 4 guys in the line and not stack the box. Because, there's always the chance that he blows open the game on you in the first part of it. So I think the way Taylor is playing is interesting because it's going to force teams to do some stuff that you wouldn't typically do against a passing offense with the numbers that the Colts have.
No, I mean, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think his yards after contact rank like 3rd in the rush game this year. I mean, it's just really incredible what he's doing on the ground. Both just and the yards he's picking up, the fact that it's not like an obscene workload level. I mean, the rushing touchdowns, you think back to some of these great rushing seasons that we've seen over the last couple of years from guys like Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry and even Christian McCaffrey, and they're getting close to 2,000 yards on the ground, but only having somewhere between 10 and 15 touchdowns. And he's already got 15 rushing touchdowns, and we're only 10 games into the year. We don't need to rehash the MVP discussion here again today, here and now, but it's a really extra special weapon that they have this year, and we'll see what this ultimately leads to when it comes to Sunday. When we look at all of what we've talked about here as a whole, how do you feel like the Colts ultimately net out in this one Sunday in KC?
I feel oddly good about it from a Colts standpoint. Like, the more I dug into some of the Chiefs' defensive numbers, like their scoring defense is really good, but like on a per play basis, which it honestly, that tends to be what I look at more often, is the per play. On a per play basis, I think there's some stuff in there with Kansas City's defense. Like, Chris Jones not being the same player is a big deal. They're really not posting good sack and pressure rates. They're 20th in sacks. They're 22nd in pressure rate according to Next Gen Stats. On a per play basis, like, this is what was interesting to me. Total yards, rushing yards, passing yards. If you're just looking at the yards gained, they're 7th in total yards, 9th in rushing yards, 11th in passing yards allowed. But if you look at those three categories on a per play basis, they're 17th in rushing yards per carry, they're 23rd in yards per dropback, and then they're 20th in yards per play overall. And this Colts offense, if you go look at their numbers, it's still the best offense in football, even with the pressure and sack issues that they've had the last couple of weeks. They still lead the league in scoring by like a field goal, a full field goal, or close to a full field goal over the Cowboys. And I just think if you give them a game against a team that maybe has benefited some from, holding onto the ball and giving less chances to their defense, they're going to find a way to get home. Like, if you want to go to the yards per play for the Colts offense, first in yards per play, first in yards per carry, fourth in yards per dropback. Like, this is an elite offense. And I think that some of the Chiefs stuff, if you look at, like I said, per play basis, underlying rate, pressure rate, that kind of thing, it just feels like this is a Chiefs team and a Chiefs defense that the Colts can really do something against. Also, not for nothing, it's sometimes this didn't work with the Pittsburgh game, but I do think it's interesting that Shane Steichen, the last time Shane Steichen went up against Steve Spagnuolo, the predictions going into it was that the Eagles were going to have a pretty hard time scoring, and that's not how it played out at all. The Eagles offense actually went up and down the field in Steichen's Super Bowl opportunity.
That's a good point. It feels to me like a game where if you can eliminate those turnovers, again, most of those involving the quarterback in some way, whether it's fumbles on sacks or interceptions that we've seen from Daniel Jones over the last couple of weeks, if the Colts can eliminate those, I feel like this is a game they absolutely can win. But a lot of that comes down to, probably going, if you can eliminate turnovers and reach 30 points, I think this is a game that they win. If you have a couple turnovers that really kill some scoring opportunities and maybe they only get to 20, I don't know that I like their odds so much winning a game where both teams score somewhere between 16 and 23 points. I think that's, it's those types of games, despite, going up against a Kansas City team that has, I think, lost all 5 of its games in one possession contests this year. They won all 10 or all 11. I can't remember the exact number of those last year. That's a stat that eventually kind of nets out and evens out. So, I I don't know that you want to get into although, the Colts have had some success in some game winning drive type situations this year. I still don't know that you want to get into a grind it out over the final 5 or 6 minutes type of game against Kansas City, especially if you are giving the ball to Patrick Mahomes and you're giving him a chance to potentially drive down the score and put the Chiefs in scoring position to win. I think this is a game where if you can get out to an early lead, I think this is it's that much more important against this team than just about any of them. So we'll see how that all ultimately
nets out. In your defense, the Colts 2 losses this year, they've scored 20 points, and they haven't scored fewer than 29 in any other game.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what that feels like. Feels like if you can get to 30, that feels like a magic number. I don't know that. Yeah, like this defense, though it's not tops in the league, it's one that it feels like it can hold most, if not all, offenses to somewhere in that 20 to 25 points. Again, they lost, I think, 27-20 in both of their games that they lost this year. So it just kind of feels like a game where if the offense can be sharp, not make mistakes, I think there's enough on both sides of the ball that they can pull this one out. But it's not going to be an easy one. This could potentially be the first time that Patrick Mahomes has lost 3 games in a row in a single regular season in his Chiefs career. So that's something to keep an eye on. That just kind of points back to how great this group has been over the last, 8-ish years or so since he got the starting job in 2018, along with Andy Reid, who of course has been there the whole time. But will not be an easy game for them to win. I certainly would not expect this to be a blowout. Probably on either side. I would imagine this is probably a game that comes down to one score or maybe at most 10 points, but it'll be an interesting one to see play out. An important one for the Colts to continue to try to keep up in this race for the number 1 seed. They are of course 8-2 instead of the 9-2 that both the Broncos and the Patriots hold right now. Teams that have yet to go on a bye. The Patriots have one of, if not the easiest schedules down the stretch here, and I don't know that the Broncos is quite as difficult as what the Colts face. So it's going to be an uphill battle, I think, in some ways for the Colts to try and hold on to their hopes for a 1 seed in a playoffs, where I think that could make a lot of difference when you're talking about teams like Kansas City potentially, as well as Buffalo being in those wild card spots and hoping that some other teams can go out and eliminate them before you would have to face them there in the second round. So we'll see how that all nets out, but a real big opportunity to not only keep up in that race, but potentially go a long way towards trying to knock Kansas City out of the playoffs altogether. They would fall to 5-6 if they were to lose here this weekend and be, I think, a couple games out of the playoffs and be behind in the tiebreakers against a lot of those wild card teams, including Jacksonville, including Buffalo. It's not an easy thing for that team to come back from if they're having to make up essentially 2-game deficits to some teams with about 6 games to go.
Yep. We just got the injury report while we're taping this, and the Chiefs are pretty healthy. Chiefs are very healthy. It looks like Isaiah Pacheco practiced in full on Wednesday. He's been out the last couple of weeks. They've got a guard dealing with a concussion. Other than that, the only other one is Xavier Worthy has an ankle, and it was a DNP. But I feel like that's a little bit minimized by the fact that they have Thornton and Hollywood Brown available.
Yeah, that's a good point. We will catch you guys again post game from Kansas City and recap Sunday afternoon's game here on the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to podcasts wherever you listen to it. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we continue to try and build that platform up. We appreciate those of you who have already done so, and we will continue to upload some important video content, whether it's from practice or games or some clips from this podcast. So we appreciate you guys doing that as we continue to work on that. And we will catch you guys here on Sunday evening.